Tom Brokaw reporting from Kuwait City.
Good evening, everyone. It is very early on a Thursday morning here in Kuwait, and there's a good possibility this country, this region, this world will awaken to a war that has come to a close. About 70 miles north of here, another epic tank battle, and the best of Saddam Hussein's troops are being decimated. Late word from the Pentagon, 200 tanks destroyed, 50 armored personnel carriers, and about 10,000 of his best men now are heading for Iran. They are expected to be cut off. Earlier today here in Kuwait City, of course, there was joy over liberation from 7 months of Iraqi occupation. 7 months of terrorism and nightmares, 7 months of atrocities. The liberating force, led by the American Marines, the Saudis and the Egyptians, all were greeted in the streets of this capital. I am in the middle of Kuwait City right now, but the power is completely out. The American embassy is less than 40 yards away. Nothing going on there tonight as well. Momentarily, we'll be hearing from President Bush as he addresses the nation tonight to bring this news of the military battle that is almost complete. Although earlier in the day he did reject the final terms of Saddam Hussein because Saddam Hussein, from his bunker somewhere in Baghdad or wherever it is in Iraq, would not yet accept all of the UN resolutions, a mandate that President Bush has insisted on throughout all of this. Militarily, the battle and the victory has been overwhelming for the alliance. Less than 30 killed for the Americans altogether. Now let's go to the White House and President George Bush addressing the nation tonight on what...
Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. We share in their joy, a joy tempered only by our compassion for their ordeal. Tonight, the Kuwaiti flag once again flies above the capital of a free and sovereign nation, and the American flag flies above our embassy. 7 months ago, America and the world drew a line in the sand. We declared that the aggression against Kuwait would not stand. And tonight, America and the world have kept their word. This is not a time of euphoria, certainly not a time to gloat, but it is a time of pride. Pride in our troops, pride in the friends who stood with us in the crisis, pride in our nation, and the people whose strength and resolve made victory quick, decisive, and just. And soon, we will open wide our arms to welcome back home to America our magnificent fighting forces. No one country can claim this victory as its own. It was not only a victory for Kuwait, but a victory for all the coalition partners. This is a victory for the United Nations, for all mankind, for the rule of law, and for what is right. After consulting with Secretary of Defense Cheney, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Powell, and our coalition partners, I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations. It is up to Iraq whether this suspension on the part of the coalition becomes a permanent ceasefire. Coalition political and military terms for a formal ceasefire include the following requirements. Iraq must release immediately all coalition prisoners of war, third country nationals, and the remains of all who have fallen. Iraq must release all Kuwaiti detainees. Iraq also must inform Kuwaiti authorities of the location and nature of all land and sea mines. Iraq must comply fully with all relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions. This includes a rescinding of Iraq's August decision to annex Kuwait, and acceptance in principle of Iraq's responsibility to pay compensation for the loss, damage, and injury its aggression has caused. The coalition calls upon the Iraqi government to designate military commanders to meet within 48 hours with their coalition counterparts at a place in the theater of operations to be specified to arrange for military aspects of the ceasefire. Further, I have asked Secretary of State Baker to request that the United Nations Security Council meet to formulate the necessary arrangements for this war to be ended. This suspension of offensive combat operations is contingent upon Iraq's not firing upon any coalition forces and not launching Scud missiles against any other country. If Iraq violates these terms, coalition forces will be free to resume military operations. At every opportunity, I have said to the people of Iraq that our quarrel was not with them, but instead with their leadership, and above all with Saddam Hussein. This remains the case. You, the people of Iraq, are not our enemy. We do not seek your destruction. We have treated your POWs with kindness. Coalition forces fought this war only as a last resort and look forward to the day when Iraq is led by people prepared to live in peace with their neighbors. We must now begin to look beyond victory in war. We must meet the challenge of securing the peace. In the future, as before, we will consult with our coalition partners. We've already done a good deal of thinking and planning for the post-war period, and Secretary Baker has already begun to consult with our coalition partners on the region's challenges. There can be and will be no solely American answer to all these challenges, but we can assist and support the countries of the region and be a catalyst for peace. In this spirit, as Secretary Baker will go to the region next week to begin a new round of consultations. This war is now behind us. Ahead of us is the difficult task of securing a potentially historic peace. Tonight, though, let us be proud of what we have accomplished. Let us give thanks to those who risked their lives. Let us never forget those who gave their lives. May God bless our valiant military forces and their families, and let us all remember them in our prayers. Good night, and may God bless the United States of America.
A quietly and confidently triumphant President Bush tonight addressing the American people from the Oval Office, the most dramatic announcement of his presidency. This war, he said, is over. There will be a ceasefire at midnight tonight. It will be a suspension. And the ceasefire will be permanent if Saddam Hussein meets a lot of terms. Fred Francis at the Pentagon, John Cochran at the White House. I'm losing my voice momentarily, Fred. I'll get it back, I know, in a moment. But tell us now, what happens if Saddam Hussein, as he has in the past, doesn't measure up to all the conditions the president has set forth tonight? What is there left for the U.S. to shoot at?
Well, there's not really a great deal left. There's basically one division left, and in the last 4 hours, Tom, that division could have surrendered because they had no out. One of the problems with this ceasefire over the next 3 hours is getting the word to those approximately 18 battalions that are scattered about southern Iraq and northern Kuwait, Iraqi battalions, not to fire their weapons. As you know, Tom, communications to these units has been abysmal. These guys have fought out in the field, and they have not had orders from headquarters. So that will be the problem. He has given Saddam Hussein basically 3 hours to get the word out that the firing should stop. And I see the Scud missile threat as one way Saddam can stop this whole thing. And finally, Tom, I would say that the Iraqi army is no longer an army. 545,000 men, led by 120,000 of the Republican Guards, are finished. And while the liberation of Kuwait was a goal, it was this president's goal to finish the Republican Guards, and I think that he has completed that today. Tom?
Fred Francis, the Pentagon, thank you very much. The president saying Iraq's army is defeated, Kuwait is liberated. It is time to put this war behind us, to look to the future. He did not say, however, what he intends to do about Saddam Hussein, if anything. John Cochran at the White House, what do they have in mind for Iraq's maximum leader?
They have in mind continuing economic sanctions to pressure, if you will, the Iraqi people to get rid of Saddam Hussein. The hope here at the White House is that the Iraqi people will say, we simply can't put up with this guy any longer. He's leading us to total destruction. Our economy will be further devastated, and the hope is that the Iraqis, probably someone in the military, will rise up and topple him. And the hope here is that another bad guy, one of his colonels, for example, would not replace him, that somebody with some sort of democratic leanings would replace him. One thing that the president's speech did tonight, however, was to, I think, reassure the world community, possibly the Arab world and certainly Iraqis, that he's not going to march on Baghdad, either to try to capture Saddam Hussein or to wreak any further damage on Baghdad, Tom. He also did not say a couple of things that they'd been thinking about putting in the president's remarks tonight. They've apparently had second thoughts about that. There was some consideration to saying that the president intended to bring a substantial number of American troops home very shortly, and that his hope was that Arab peacekeeping forces could take over much of the role in Kuwait. Tom?
Thank you, John Cochran at the White House. Fred Francis at the Defense Department. We'll ask you to stand by. We want to talk now in Washington with Ed Peck, who is the former chief of mission in Baghdad for the United States Embassy there. Ed, what do you think? Saddam Hussein will accept these terms or not?
Well, they're liberal. As you pointed out, they're complicated. There's a whole string of them. And he has to get the word to his people to stop firing before midnight our time in order for the ceasefire to hold. I would guess, that the Americans stop firing. Perhaps the Iraqis will on the basis of the way the war is going. Saddam Hussein has had smaller and smaller places through which he could wiggle, and it's getting awful tight on him now. The last word that I heard was that even in the United Nations, they'd rejected his partial acceptance of the requirements of which he was already well aware, and I don't know how he gets the word on these new ones.
And the president also described tonight the military surrender terms as well, a place somewhere in the desert where Iraq's designated military commanders would meet with the Allied commanders and give up their swords, so to speak. The president is out to make sure the whole world knows that Saddam Hussein cannot walk around this one. Will that make it difficult as well for Saddam Hussein to accept these terms?
Yeah, difficult both for him personally and difficult in trying to get the word out to his people where they're supposed to go and when. It's been so interesting to watch how stubborn this man has demonstrated himself to be repeatedly. It should have been clear already some time ago, Tom, that it was all over for him and all over for his military, but like a lot of people suggested, he just does not give up easily. And it's tough to tell now, when faced with this utter collapse of his effort, whether he'll be able to bend the knee, as it were, to bow the head and accept these final steps. I kind of have the feeling myself that at this stage, he may not be able to do it psychologically, even yet.
Thank you, Ed Peck in Washington. Now to New York, and your colleague, who's a consultant to NBC News as well as a military strategist and a keen student of Saddam Hussein, James Dunnigan. Mr. Dunnigan, your judgment on what the president has announced tonight and where it is likely to lead from here.
Well, right now I think the Ba'ath Party, of which Saddam is only the titular head, is having second thoughts about their current leader. Obviously, they could turn Saddam into a combination scapegoat and martyr and take a lot of heat off themselves. The major problem is now that nobody's in control. The communications have been so destroyed that it's unlikely that the Ba'ath Party or Saddam can even get the ceasefire order out to his own troops. So it's unreasonable for President Bush or the coalition forces to expect that all of the Iraqi troops are going to know by midnight that a ceasefire is in place and they're not supposed to shoot anymore.
What happens now in this region, do you think, Mr. Dunnigan? Will there be a security force of some kind? The president apparently is thinking about a mostly Arab security force. Do you think that could ever work, given the kind of rivalries and tensions that always exist in the Middle East?
Well, I think the best model of what might happen is Lebanon, and that hasn't worked. We've been waiting for the Kurds to rise up in rebellion, and I'm sure they're thinking about that right now. So there goes the northern third of Iraq. Without the Ba'ath Party and the rest of Iraq, the country could go apart, because there are almost as many different religious and ethnic groups in Iraq as there are in Lebanon. I think there's serious worry that Iraq could slide into the same sort of 15, 16-year chaos that Lebanon has been suffering.
Thanks, James Dunnigan in New York. And all around us tonight, we believe in their battlefield positions that the members of the Allied force must be getting this word probably through their shortwave radios. There must be enormous glee on their part. It's been a short war, but it's been very difficult in these hostile conditions. In Carlsbad, California tonight, NBC's Don Oliver is standing by with some Marines who are stationed at Camp Pendleton to get their reaction.